The autumn of 1991 brought an early chill to Cedar Falls, Iowa, a town where the Mississippi River carved its way through rolling farmland and Victorian houses stood like sentinels along tree-lined streets. It was the kind of place where children still rode their bikes without helmets, where screen doors slammed shut at dinner time, and where parents trusted their neighbors implicitly. Lily Chen had moved there just 6 months earlier with her 8-year-old daughter Lily, seeking the kind of safe, wholesome environment that seemed increasingly rare in America. Sarah worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and like many single mothers in 1991, she juggled long shifts with the constant worry of raising a child alone. Lily was a quiet, thoughtful girl, with dark hair that hung in neat braids and eyes that seemed older than her years. She had adjusted well to their new life in Cedar Falls, making friends at Lincoln Elementary and showing a particular interest in music. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with viewers from around the world. Now, let's continue with Lily's story. It was Mrs. Evelyn Hartwell who first suggested piano lessons. She lived 3 houses down from the Chens in a grand Victorian painted sage green with white trim. At 72, she had taught piano for nearly 5 decades, and her living room was filled with photographs of former students who had gone on to music careers or simply carried her lessons into their adult lives as a source of joy. When she heard Lily humming Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik while walking past her house, she knew she had found a natural musician. "That child has an ear," Mrs. Hartwell told Sarah one crisp October afternoon. "I'd be honored to teach her if you're interested." Sarah hesitated. Money was tight, and piano lessons seemed like a luxury, but Mrs. Hartwell waved away her concerns about payment. "Every child deserves music in their life," she said. "We'll work something out." And so it was arranged. Lily would have her first piano lesson on Wednesday, October 23, 1991, at 4:30 p.m., right after school. She spent the weekend practicing finger positions that Mrs. Hartwell had shown her, stretching her small hands across an imaginary keyboard on the kitchen table. Wednesday arrived grey and drizzling, the kind of weather that made the old Victorian houses of Cedar Falls look mysterious and romantic. Lily walked to school that morning wearing her favorite outfit, a purple sweater with tiny silver buttons, dark blue corduroy pants, and her new white sneakers with pink laces that Sarah had bought her just the week before. She carried her backpack and her beloved stuffed rabbit, Mr. Buttons, whom she still took everywhere, despite being too old for stuffed animals. At Lincoln Elementary, Lily's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed the girl seemed more excited than usual. During afternoon recess, Lily told her best friend, Jenny Morrison, about the piano lesson. "Mrs. Hartwell says I might be able to play chopsticks by Christmas," she whispered conspiratorially. When the final bell rang at 3:15 p.m., Lily gathered her things and walked the familiar route home. Several classmates and teachers later confirmed seeing her leave the school grounds at the usual time. She stopped at Kowalski's corner store, as she did most days, to buy a piece of penny candy with the nickel Sarah gave her for such treats. Mr. Kowalski, a Polish immigrant who had run the store for 30 years, remembered her buying a root beer barrel and asking if he thought piano lessons were hard. "I told her anything worth doing takes practice," he would later tell police. "She smiled and said she was going to practice every day until she was as good as Liberace." He watched through his storefront window as she skipped down Maple Street toward home, her backpack bouncing rhythmically. Lily arrived home at 3:45 p.m. to an empty house. Sarah wouldn't finish her shift at the hospital until 6 p.m. This was normal. Lily was a responsible child who knew to lock the door behind her and call her mother to confirm she was home safely. The call came at 3:47 p.m., recorded on the hospital's phone logs. "Hi, Mom. I'm home." Lily's voice was bright with anticipation. I'm going to have a snack and then go to Mrs. Hartwell's at 4:30. I can't wait." Sarah smiled as she took the call at the nurse's station. "Remember to be polite and pay attention," she said, "and call me when you get home from your lesson." "I will. Love you, Mom." "Love you too, sweetheart." Those would be the last words Sarah Chen ever heard her daughter speak. At 4:25 p.m., Lily left the house through the front door. Mrs. Patterson, who lived across the street, was raking leaves in her yard and waved to the little girl. Lily waved back and called out, "I'm going to my first piano lesson." Mrs. Patterson would later describe Lily as seeming absolutely thrilled, and noted that she was still carrying her stuffed rabbit. The walk to Mrs. Hartwell's house should have taken exactly 5 minutes. The route was simple. 3 blocks down Maple Street, turn right on Oak Avenue, and the sage green Victorian would be on the left. It was a path Lily had walked dozens of times, always in broad daylight, always in the safety of their quiet neighborhood. Mrs. Hartwell waited in her living room, sheet music arranged on the old upright piano, a plate of homemade cookies on the side table. At 4:35, she glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner, thinking perhaps Lily was nervous and running a few minutes late. At 4:45, she began to worry. At 5 p.m., she called the Chen house. No answer. By 5:15, Mrs. Hartwell had put on her coat and walked the route between her house and Lily's, looking for any sign of the child. She knocked on doors, asked neighbors if they had seen a little girl with braids carrying a stuffed rabbit. No one had seen Lily since Mrs. Patterson waved goodbye to her at 4:25. When Sarah arrived home from work at 6:15 p.m., she found Mrs. Hartwell waiting on her front porch, worry etched deep in the older woman's face. "She never came to her lesson," Mrs. Hartwell said simply, and Sarah's world tilted on its axis. The Cedar Falls Police Department responded within minutes of Sarah's frantic call. Officer Michael Torres, who had been patrolling the quiet streets for 8 years without encountering anything more serious than teenagers drinking beer behind the water tower, suddenly found himself coordinating what would become the most extensive search in the town's history. The initial canvass yielded frustratingly little information. Mrs. Patterson confirmed seeing Lily leave at 4:25. Mr. Henderson, who was washing his car on Oak Avenue, remembered hearing a child's laughter sometime around 4:30, but couldn't be sure it was Lily. Mrs. Carmichael, who lived on the corner of Maple and Oak, had been inside preparing dinner and saw nothing unusual. By 8 p.m., volunteers from throughout Cedar Falls had joined the search. The fire department brought floodlights, and the county sheriff's office sent additional officers and a bloodhound named Rex. They combed every yard, every alley, every building within a mile radius of the route between Lily's house and Mrs. Hartwell's. They searched the storm drains, the old grain elevator by the railroad tracks, and the abandoned Woolworths building downtown. Rex, the bloodhound, picked up Lily's scent easily from her bedroom, following it down Maple Street exactly as expected. But at the intersection of Maple and Oak, the dog became confused, running in circles and whining. The scent seemed to simply vanish, as if Lily had evaporated into the grey October air. The first 48 hours brought intensive investigation but no breakthrough. FBI agents arrived from Des Moines, setting up a command center in the Cedar Falls Community Center. They interviewed everyone who lived along Lily's route, everyone who worked within a 5-block radius, everyone who had any connection to the Chen family. They examined the possibility that Lily's biological father, who lived in California and had no contact with his daughter, might somehow be involved. They looked into every registered sex offender within a 100-mile radius. Sarah barely slept, barely ate, spending her days at the command center staring at maps and timelines, her nights walking the streets calling Lily's name. The whole town seemed to hold its breath, and yellow ribbons appeared on trees, lampposts, and mailboxes throughout Cedar Falls. On Friday, October 25th, 2 days after Lily's disappearance, a construction worker named Dale Munson made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the investigation. He was installing a new water main on Oak Avenue, just 2 blocks from Mrs. Hartwell's house, when his excavator struck something in the soft earth. He initially thought it was a tree root, but when he climbed down to investigate, he found Mr. Buttons, Lily's stuffed rabbit, buried about 18 inches deep in what appeared to be freshly disturbed soil. The FBI's evidence team processed the scene with meticulous care. The rabbit showed no signs of damage, no blood or other evidence of violence. Soil analysis revealed that the earth had been disturbed recently, within the past few days, but there were no other traces of Lily or her belongings. Most puzzling was the location. It was slightly off the direct route between Lily's house and Mrs. Hartwell's, in a small vacant lot between 2 houses where construction equipment had been parked. The discovery of Mr. Buttons brought a surge of renewed search efforts. If someone had taken the time to bury the rabbit, they reasoned, perhaps they had left other clues. Volunteers and law enforcement officers expanded their search radius, combing through rural areas outside town, dragging ponds and checking every abandoned building in the county. But as days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months, the trail grew cold. The FBI maintained their investigation, following up on hundreds of tips that led nowhere. Reported sightings of Lily came from as far away as Florida and Oregon, but none proved credible. The reward fund, started by the Cedar Falls business community, grew to $50,000, but it couldn't buy the one thing everyone wanted: answers. Sarah took a leave of absence from the hospital, spending her days distributing flyers and her nights lying awake, replaying every moment of October 23rd, searching for some detail she might have missed, some clue that could bring her daughter home. The house on Maple Street became a shrine to Lily, her room preserved exactly as it had been that last morning, her clothes still in the hamper, her homework still spread across her desk. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Cedar Falls in snow by mid-November. The search efforts, while never officially called off, became less frequent and less intensive. Life in the small town tried to return to normal, but there was a shadow now, a collective awareness that sometimes children simply vanished, even in the safest places. Mrs. Hartwell never again offered piano lessons to another child. She would often stand at her living room window, looking down Oak Avenue toward the intersection where Lily should have turned, where a little girl's dreams of playing chopsticks by Christmas had simply ended. As 1991 gave way to 1992, Sarah made the painful decision to return to work. She needed the structure, the purpose, and frankly, the money. But she never stopped looking for Lily, never stopped believing that somehow, someday, she would find answers. The case officially remained open, but in practical terms, it joined the growing file of cold cases that haunted small-town police departments across America. Officer Torres, who had coordinated the initial search, kept Lily's missing person report on his desk for years, occasionally following up on leads that never led anywhere. And life moved forward, as it always does, even in the face of unthinkable loss. But Cedar Falls was changed forever by those 5 minutes on October 23, 1991, when a little girl walked out of her house to learn piano and simply disappeared into the grey afternoon, leaving behind only questions and a stuffed rabbit buried in soft earth. The years passed with cruel indifference to Sarah Chen's grief. She remained in Cedar Falls, unable to leave the place where she had last seen her daughter, afraid that if she moved, Lily wouldn't know how to find her. The house on Maple Street became both sanctuary and prison, filled with memories that brought comfort and pain in equal measure. Sarah established a routine that kept her functioning through the darkest periods. She worked her shifts at the hospital, where the immediacy of other people's medical crises provided temporary respite from her own devastating loss. She volunteered with missing children organizations, helping other families navigate the bewildering maze of law enforcement agencies, media attention, and false hope that comes with having a vanished child. Every October 23rd, she held a candlelight vigil in Riverside Park, and every year fewer people attended. Not because they had forgotten Lily, but because hope has its own half-life. And after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, even the most well-meaning neighbors began to accept that Lily Chen was probably never coming home. Officer Torres retired in 2003, handing Lily's case file to Detective Maria Santos, a young investigator who had grown up hearing about the missing girl who never made it to her piano lesson. Santos reviewed the file thoroughly, re-interviewed key witnesses, and even consulted with new forensic specialists about the soil where Mr. Buttons had been found. But 12 years later, the evidence was exactly what it had been in 1991, insufficient and perplexing. In 2006, Sarah finally made the decision that many parents of missing children face but few can bring themselves to execute. She held a memorial service for Lily. It wasn't an admission that her daughter was dead. Sarah could never bring herself to declare that, but rather an acknowledgement that life needed to include some form of closure, some way to honor Lily's memory while allowing the community to grieve. The service was held at First Methodist Church, the same church where Lily had attended Sunday school during their brief time in Cedar Falls. More than 300 people attended, including Mrs. Hartwell, now 87 and frail, but determined to pay her respects to the student she never had the chance to teach. Many attendees had never met Lily personally, but had been touched by her story, by the image of a bright-eyed 8-year-old who had vanished while pursuing something as innocent and beautiful as music lessons. Sarah spoke briefly at the service, her voice steady despite her tears. Lily believed in the magic of music, she said. She thought that if she practiced hard enough, she could play anything. I want to believe that wherever she is, she's still making music, still filling the world with the kind of joy she brought to everyone who knew her. After the memorial, Sarah made another difficult decision. She finally cleaned out Lily's room, not to erase her daughter's memory, but to transform the space from a frozen monument to loss into something that celebrated the vibrant child Lily had been. She donated most of Lily's clothes to local charities, keeping only a few special items: the purple sweater Lily had worn on her last day, her favorite book about a girl who could talk to animals, and a drawing she had made of their house in Cedar Falls, complete with stick figures of herself and Sarah holding hands in front of their white picket fence. The room became Sarah's study, but she kept one corner exactly as Lily had left it, her small desk with colored pencils still scattered across the surface, her bookshelf with its collection of fairy tales and adventure stories, and on the windowsill a framed photograph of Lily at her 8th birthday party, wearing a paper crown and grinning at the camera with chocolate cakes smeared on her chin. As the 20th anniversary of Lily's disappearance approached in 2011, Detective Santos made one more attempt to generate new leads. She arranged for the case to be featured on a television program about cold cases, hoping that advances in technology or simply the passage of time might have loosened someone's tongue. The episode aired on a Tuesday night in October, and the tips line received more than 200 calls over the following week. Most were well-meaning but unhelpful, people who thought they remembered seeing a child matching Lily's description in distant cities, psychics offering to channel messages from the other side, and conspiracy theorists convinced that Lily's disappearance was connected to everything from government cover-ups to alien abduction. One call, however, stood out. Mrs. Dorothy Vance, now in her 80s, called from a nursing home in neighboring Waterloo. She had watched the television program and realized she had never spoken to police about what she had seen on October 23, 1991. On that day, She had been visiting her sister who lived on Oak Avenue, just 1 block from Mrs. Hartwell's house. Around 4:30 p.m., she remembered seeing a man talking to a little girl near the construction area where Mr. Buttons would later be found. "I didn't think anything of it at the time," Mrs. Vance told Detective Santos. The man seemed to know the child. She wasn't crying or trying to get away. They were just talking, like maybe he was giving her directions or something. But then I went inside to help my sister with dinner, and I never saw what happened after that. Mrs. Vance's description of the man was frustratingly vague. Middle-aged, average height, wearing dark clothing and a baseball cap. She couldn't recall his face or any distinguishing features. But she was certain about the timing and location, and her account provided the first potential eyewitness testimony of someone actually interacting with Lily after she left her house. Detective Santos worked with a sketch artist to create a composite drawing based on Mrs. Vance's 20-year-old memories, but the resulting image was too generic to generate meaningful leads. Still, the call represented the most significant development in the case since the discovery of Mr. Buttons, and it gave Sarah a renewed sense that someone, somewhere, knew what had happened to her daughter. The investigation that followed Mrs. Vance's call was thorough, but ultimately fruitless. Police re-canvassed the neighborhood, focusing on residents who had lived there in 1991 and might have forgotten or overlooked details. They compiled lists of construction workers, delivery drivers, and service personnel who had been in the area on October 23rd. They even exhumed records from the water main project that had been underway when Lily disappeared, tracking down every worker who had been on the job site. But 2011 passed without any breakthrough, and 2012 and 2013. Sarah turned 50, then 55. Her dark hair showing silver streaks that reminded her of the passage of time in ways both cruel and gentle. She had never remarried, never had other children, though not for lack of opportunities. Her heart remained too occupied with grief and hope to make room for new love. She found solace in her work with missing children organizations, which had evolved from a way to cope with her own loss into a genuine calling. She had helped dozens of families navigate the early hours and days after a child's disappearance, offering practical advice about media relations, search coordination, and the complex emotions that come with existing in the liminal space between hope and despair. In 2018, Detective Santos retired, and Lily's case was transferred to Detective James Patterson, no relation to the neighbor who had waved goodbye to Lily all those years ago. Patterson was a meticulous investigator who believed that cold cases were only unsolvable until they weren't. He spent his first months on the job reviewing every piece of evidence, every interview transcript, every tip that had been called in over nearly 3 decades. Patterson was particularly intrigued by the location where Mr. Buttons had been found. The construction site had been active for several weeks before Lily's disappearance, with workers digging trenches for new water lines throughout the neighborhood. If someone had abducted Lily, burying her stuffed rabbit in construction area would have been a clever way to hide evidence. The constant digging and earth moving would have concealed any signs of recent disturbance. He obtained the original construction plans and compared them to current city records, noting several discrepancies. Over the years, additional utility work had been done in the area, and some of the original trenches had been refilled and excavated multiple times. If other evidence had been buried near Mr. Buttons, it might have been moved or destroyed by subsequent construction. Patterson's investigation took on new urgency in 2022 when the city announced plans for a major infrastructure upgrade that would involve digging up most of Oak Avenue. If there were any remaining clues buried in the area, this might be the last chance to find them before they were lost forever. Working with the city planning department, Patterson arranged for archaeologists and forensic specialists to monitor the excavation work. Every shovel of dirt was examined, every anomaly investigated. The work was painstaking and expensive, but Sarah had agreed to fund it using money from Lily's college fund, an account she had continued contributing to for 30 years, hoping against hope that someday her daughter would come home and need it. For 3 weeks in July 2022, Oak Avenue looked like an archaeological dig site. Volunteers sifted through tons of earth, looking for anything that might be connected to Lily's disappearance. They found the usual detritus of urban life: old bottles, lost toys, rusty tools, and fragments of pottery from houses built in the 1890s, but nothing that seemed connected to a missing 8-year-old girl. Then, on July 23rd, exactly 30 years and 9 months after Lily's disappearance, excavation supervisor Carl Rodriguez noticed something unusual in the dirt wall of a trench they were digging near the spot where Mr. Buttons had been found. What looked like a small section of concrete or plaster seemed out of place among the clay and rock that comprised the area's natural soil. Further careful excavation revealed that the concrete was actually part of a small, crude chamber that had been constructed underground, essentially a concrete box about 3 feet square and 2 feet deep. When they finally broke through the concrete shell, they found themselves staring at a cache of items that made Detective Patterson's heart race and his stomach drop simultaneously. Inside the concrete chamber were children's belongings that appeared to date from the early 1990s. A Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles backpack, a Nintendo Game Boy with a Super Mario Land cartridge still inserted, several small pieces of clothing, and most shocking of all, 3 pairs of children's shoes. One pair consisted of small white sneakers with pink laces, exactly matching the description of what Lily Chen had been wearing on October 23, 1991. The discovery sent shockwaves through Cedar Falls and beyond. For the first time in 31 years, investigators had physical evidence that might explain what had happened to Lily Chen. But the implications were as horrifying as they were illuminating. The concrete chamber and its contents suggested not a random abduction or even a single incident, but something far more systematic and deliberate. The items in the chamber were carefully catalogued and sent to the state crime lab for analysis. DNA testing confirmed that the white sneakers with pink laces had indeed belonged to Lily. Traces of her DNA were found on the insoles and laces. But more disturbing were the other items. The backpack contained notebooks with the name Marcus Williams written inside, and clothing that appeared to belong to at least 2 other children. Detective Patterson began cross-referencing missing children cases from Iowa and surrounding states during the 1990s. Marcus Williams had disappeared from Dubuque in 1993, 2 years after Lily vanished. He had been 9 years old when he failed to return home from a friend's house, and like Lily's case, his disappearance had never been solved. The third set of belongings appeared to belong to a girl, but no clear identification could be made from the items found. The discovery of the underground chamber raised more questions than it answered. Who had constructed it, and why? How long had the children's belongings been hidden there? Most importantly, if this was evidence of multiple abductions, where were the children themselves? The investigation that followed was unlike anything Cedar Falls had ever seen. FBI agents returned to the quiet Iowa town, this time armed with ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and forensic archaeologists. The search expanded beyond Oak Avenue to include other areas where construction had taken place in the early 1990s, other locations where evidence might have been hidden. Sarah Chen, now 61 years old, watched the investigation unfold with a mixture of hope and dread. After 31 years of not knowing, she was finally getting answers. But they were not the answers she had prayed for. The discovery of Lily's shoes suggested that her daughter had indeed been abducted, but it also strongly implied that she was dead and had been dead for 3 decades. Still, Sarah felt a sense of vindication that bordered on relief. For 31 years, she had lived with the terrible uncertainty of not knowing what had happened to her child. She had endured well-meaning suggestions that maybe Lily had run away. Maybe she had gotten lost and would someday find her way home. Maybe she was living somewhere else with a new identity. The discovery of the concrete chamber, horrific as it was, finally provided definitive proof that Lily had been the victim of a crime. The investigation continued through the summer and fall of 2022, expanding to include cold case detectives from multiple jurisdictions. The FBI established a task force specifically focused on identifying and apprehending whoever had been responsible for what appeared to be a series of child abductions spanning several years. Ground-penetrating radar revealed several other anomalies in the Oak Avenue area, and subsequent excavation uncovered 2 more small concrete chambers, each containing children's belongings. One chamber held items belonging to Marcus Williams and another missing child from the 1990s. The second contained belongings from what appeared to be at least 3 different children, though identification proved difficult due to the degraded condition of the items. The pattern that emerged was deeply disturbing. Someone had been systematically abducting children in Iowa and possibly surrounding states during the early to mid-1990s, taking their belongings as trophies and hiding evidence in carefully constructed underground chambers. The concrete construction suggested planning and premeditation, while the location of the chambers near active construction sites demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of how to hide evidence. But despite the extensive investigation, the most important questions remained unanswered. Who had done this, and where were the children? The chambers contained belongings but no human remains, leading investigators to theorize that the victims had been taken elsewhere, possibly out of state or even out of the country. As 2022 drew to a close, the investigation had identified belongings from at least 7 different children who had disappeared between 1990 and 1996. All had vanished under similar circumstances. They had been walking alone during daylight hours in small Iowa towns. They had disappeared without witnesses, and their cases had gone cold due to lack of evidence. The revelation that Lily's disappearance was part of a much larger pattern brought both comfort and additional anguish to Sarah. She was no longer alone in her grief. There were other families who had endured the same devastating loss. But the scope of the crimes suggested a level of evil that was almost incomprehensible. Detective Patterson worked tirelessly to identify potential suspects, focusing on individuals who had been in the Cedar Falls area in 1991 and had subsequently left the state. Construction workers, traveling salesmen, long-haul truck drivers, anyone whose job might have taken them to multiple small Iowa towns during the relevant time period. The breakthrough came in early 2023, almost by accident. While reviewing old case files from the Marcus Williams disappearance, Patterson noticed a detail that had been overlooked in the original investigation. A witness had reported seeing Marcus talking to a man near a white pickup truck on the day he disappeared. The witness had provided a partial license plate number, but police in 1993 had been unable to trace it. Using modern database technology, Patterson was able to determine that the partial plate number corresponded to a vehicle registered to a man named Donald Eugene Harper, who had worked as an independent contractor installing cable television systems throughout Iowa in the early 1990s. Harper's work records showed that he had been in Cedar Falls during the week of Lily's disappearance, installing cable systems in the neighborhood just 2 blocks from Oak Avenue. Further investigation revealed that Harper had left Iowa abruptly in late 1996, selling his house and business and moving to Arizona. He had continued working in telecommunications, eventually starting his own company that contracted with cable and internet providers throughout the Southwest. When Arizona authorities located Harper in Tucson, they found a 63-year-old man living quietly in a modest ranch house with his wife of 15 years. He had no criminal record, paid his taxes, and was considered a pillar of his community. But when Detective Patterson and FBI agents showed him photographs of the children's belongings found in the concrete chambers, Harper's composure cracked. After 6 hours of questioning, Donald Eugene Harper confessed to abducting and murdering 7 children in Iowa between 1990 and 1996, including Lily Chen and Marcus Williams. His confession was methodical and emotionless, delivered in the flat tone of someone describing a business transaction rather than the most heinous crimes imaginable. Harper explained that he had targeted children who were walking alone, approaching them with stories about needing help, finding a lost pet, or asking for directions. His work as a cable installer gave him legitimate reasons to be in residential neighborhoods, and his white pickup truck was familiar enough not to arouse suspicion. Once he had gained a child's trust, he would convince them to get in his truck, telling them he would drive them to wherever they claimed to be going. He had taken the children to a remote property he owned in rural Iowa, where he had killed them and buried their bodies. He kept their belongings as trophies, hiding them in the concrete chambers he constructed near his job sites. The chambers served a dual purpose. They satisfied his need to keep mementos of his crimes, while also providing a way to dispose of evidence in locations where it was unlikely to be found. When asked why he had targeted children, Harper showed no emotion. "They were easy," he said simply. "They trusted adults. They didn't fight back much." The confession led investigators to Harper's former property in rural Iowa, where ground-penetrating radar revealed multiple grave sites. Over the course of several weeks, forensic teams recovered the remains of 6 children, including Lily Chen. The 7th victim, Marcus Williams, had been buried at a different location that Harper had used before acquiring the rural property. Sarah Chen was 62 years old when she finally learned the truth about what had happened to her daughter 32 years earlier. The news brought a complex mixture of emotions: relief at finally having answers, rage at the monster who had stolen Lily's life, and profound sadness at the realization that her daughter had suffered and died while Sarah spent decades hoping for her return. The recovery of Lily's remains allowed Sarah to hold the funeral she had imagined for 32 years. The service was held at First Methodist Church, the same venue where she had held Lily's memorial service 17 years earlier. This time, however, the service was a true goodbye, a final opportunity to lay her daughter to rest. Hundreds of people attended, including many who had participated in the original search efforts in 1991. Mrs. Hartwell, now 98 and in a wheelchair, was wheeled to the front of the church to say goodbye to the student she never had the chance to teach. Detective Torres, now in his 70s, sat with other retired officers who had worked on Lily's case. Even Officer Patterson, the neighbor, not the detective, attended, representing the community that had never forgotten the little girl who vanished on her way to piano lessons. Sarah spoke at the service, her voice strong despite her tears. She talked about Lily's love of music, her kindness to animals, her excitement about learning to play piano. She thanked the community for never giving up hope, for keeping Lily's memory alive, and for supporting the investigation that finally brought her daughter home. "Lily never got to play chopsticks by Christmas," Sarah said. "She never got to grow up, to graduate from high school, to fall in love, to have children of her own, but she did get to be loved, completely and unconditionally, for 8 precious years. And she will continue to be loved and remembered for as long as I draw breath." Lily was buried in Cedar Falls Cemetery, in a plot Sarah had purchased years earlier, hoping someday to need it. The headstone was simple: Lily Chen, Beloved Daughter, 1983-1991, Forever in Our Hearts. But Sarah had one special addition made, a small engraving of piano keys along the bottom of the stone, a reminder of the dream that had led Lily down Oak Avenue on that grey October afternoon. Donald Eugene Harper was convicted of 7 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no remorse during his trial, offering no explanation for his crimes beyond the practical advantages of targeting children. He died in prison 3 years later, taking with him any additional secrets about his years of predatory behavior. The discovery of Harper's crimes and the resolution of multiple cold cases brought national attention to Cedar Falls, but the community handled the spotlight with the same quiet dignity it had shown during the original search for Lily. Yellow ribbons appeared again on trees and lampposts, this time not as symbols of hope, but as tributes to the children who had been lost and found. Sarah remained in Cedar Falls, finding peace in the knowledge that Lily was finally home. She continued her work with missing children organizations, using her experience to help other families navigate the complicated emotions that come with both loss and resolution. She established the Lily Chen Foundation, which provided funding for improved investigation techniques and support services for families of missing children. On quiet evenings, Sarah would sometimes walk down Maple Street to Oak Avenue, following the path Lily had taken on her last day. The route looked different now. New houses had been built, old trees had been cut down, and the construction site where Mr. Buttons had been found was now a small park with a playground and memorial garden. But Sarah could still picture her 8-year-old daughter skipping down the sidewalk, backpack bouncing, excited about her first piano lesson. She could imagine Lily's voice calling out to Mrs. Patterson across the street, her bright smile as she waved goodbye, her anticipation at finally learning to play the music she loved so much. The story of Lily Chen became part of Cedar Falls history, a reminder that even in the safest communities, evil could lurk in the most ordinary places. But it was also a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of never giving up hope, and the healing that can come from finally knowing the truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. Mrs. Hartwell passed away peacefully in 2024 at the age of 99, still living in the sage green Victorian where she had waited for a student who never arrived. Her family found dozens of pieces of sheet music in her piano bench, all marked "For Lily" in her careful handwriting, songs she had hoped to teach the little girl who loved music but never got the chance to learn. The last piece in the collection was a simple arrangement of Chopsticks, the song Lily had been so excited to play by Christmas. Mrs. Hartwell had written an inscription on the cover, "Some melodies live in our hearts even when they're never played. This one is for you, dear Lily." And so, 33 years after a little girl vanished on her way to her first piano lesson, her story finally came to an end. Not with the happy reunion Sarah had prayed for, but with the truth, and with justice, and with the knowledge that Lily Chen would never be forgotten by the community that had loved her, searched for her, and finally brought her home. In Cedar Falls, Iowa, they still talk about the importance of music education, about the value of community, and about watching out for each other's children. And sometimes, on quiet autumn afternoons, when the light slants golden through the maple trees, you can almost hear the echo of a child's laughter, the sound of small footsteps on sidewalks, and the promise of music lessons that were meant to last a lifetime.